Coming into this summer, I found myself not the most excited for gaming's top tier releases. That isn't to say that there isn't anything to look forward to, but when I was planning out what I was looking forward to, my eye was geared towards some retro revivals. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound came out near the end of July, and that will have its day soon enough because I definitely want to cover that before Ninja Gaiden 4 drops in October. But as if I wasn't prepped enough for some ninja action, Shinobi Art of Vengeance finally got a release date for sometime in August, and I'm so ready to play that. I said about as much when I covered Shinobi for PS2 a while back, but there was another game I mentioned called Nightshade. I've meant to take a look at this for a while now, but every time I thought I was ready to do that, something came up on the docket that just seemed to take precedence. However, I finally got time in my schedule, so that's what I'm gonna do today. Mind you, I found out about Nightshade long after it came out. I never saw commercials about it, never heard a soul talk about it, never even played a demo for it. No, the first time I became aware of this game's existence was when I worked at GameStop back in 2011, digging through a drawer of old PS2 games. I remember seeing this and going, why does this look exactly like Shinobi? Little did I know at the time, that's because it's a sequel to that very game, and as much as I'd like to tell you about its development, next to nothing is really known about that part of this game's life. It was developed by the same studio that made Shinobi, Sega AM Research and Development No. 1, which had rebranded into Sega WoW sometime after the release of Shinobi. They dropped Kunoichi, or Nightshade as we'd come to know it in the States, in December of 2003 for Japan, following up in other regions a few months later with the changed name, and I can only imagine Sega didn't have much faith in Americans to understand the difference between a Shinobi and a Kunoichi at the time, so they figured likening our new main character to some dainty but deadly plant would get the message across and attract the girlies to the series. I can headcanon it all I want, but like I said, there's not much to go on here, and unfortunately, not too long after this, Sega WoW shut down, leaving this game to quietly fall into cult classic status over the years as far as I can tell. I love me a good mystery as much as the next person, but even though there's little to go on, I think at this point the most important thing to me is going to be if this game is even as good or better than its predecessor. So now, over 2 decades later, and after finally playing it for the first time, let's take a look at Nightshade.
Hey, yo, Giant, let's go!
You know, it kind of surprised me how much smaller the story feels in comparison to the previous game. It starts with a quick video that does some exposition telling us that after defeating Hiriko in the last game, Hotsuma decided to seal away Akujiki. Fast forward one sizzle reel, the game opens up with our new protagonist, Hibana. And they don't really explain much past that, so I'm just wondering, where exactly is Hotsuma right now? Hibana works for the government, not sure why, but they send her to investigate some fighter jets entering Tokyo when she spots them, and then she hits a...
雷の呼吸一の型霹靂一閃
to land on a stealth bomber and fight off some enemies before she has to encounter this random robot ninja thing.
Androids?
Actually, the technical term is cyborgs.
Androids.
Almost immediately after, hellspawns start popping up in the city, which is not supposed to be happening, so Hibana investigates, finding a shard of Akujiki in the corpse of a particularly big one. I see that Ryu Hayabusa and Hotsuma shared the same brain cell when it came to dealing with cursed swords. That said, without this game's cursed sword, one thing that's immediately different is that you no longer have the inborn mechanic of having to feed your sword so that you don't lose life as you progress through the stage. So in a way, it feels like there's less urgency in the sense of needing to basically learn speedrunning strats for every stage, which does fundamentally change the feel of the game to me. And the damage multiplier from Tate combo strings also seems to be nerfed here, because when you're fighting the bosses, the amount of damage you get from big Tate strings just does not seem to be there anymore. So that's 2 ways that it feels like there's a little oomph missing here, you feel me? The bulk of the game outside of this is pretty similar if you've played Shinobi before, but enough was changed so that it feels a little bit fresher. They still have the standard attack, the kunais, the ninpo and whatnot, plus the Tate symbol from before, as I mentioned, where you chain kills together for a cinematic cinematic finish, all in service of a good score at the end of a stage. What they added to that is that, for one, there is a meter so that you can actually see the timing window for a tate combo dropping, and now there's a kick attack, which can not only be good for stunning enemies, while also adding time to the combo window. It even functions like a Sonic-styled homing attack in midair. The kick is actually really versatile, and what's more, some of its functionality is implied through presentation, which I think is really neat. In that opening scene, you watch Hibana kick a missile to redirect it, so if you're thinking about it when the jets start shooting missiles in gameplay at you during the first stage, you might think to try that based on what you saw. I think that's really clever and a good way to let players figure out some tech on their own. Now, after getting your bearings and dipping into learning what you can do in the first stages, it turns out the Nakatomi conglomerate from the last game has conspired to break Akujiki's seal on the Hellspawn and hired some ninja mercenaries to collect its shards for that purpose. These mercs are led by a man named Jimushi, who Hibana apparently has a burning hatred for, and conveniently for her, the government sends her to investigate in search of the remaining 8 shards of Akujiki. That's mostly it for the rest of the game, believe it or not. Most of the game past this is working through each stage, defeating bosses for the shards, some Hellspawn, and some being members of Jimushi's group, and... Wait, is that a fucking Galissapod? Ooh, the Nintendo ninjas are about to come through. With some of those members of Jimushi's group poking and prodding at Hibana over her past relationship with Jimushi. Doesn't take long to learn that history is that Jimushi was Hibana's master, and they were both in some way part of the Oboro clan. Jimushi defected for some reason or another, and Hibana faced some sort of punishment for it. Seems kind of fucked up, but hey, the majority of the Oboro were put on a t-shirt in the last game, and Hotsuma is nowhere in sight, so she has to direct that anger somewhere, I suppose. She eventually finds another hidden Nakatomi lab where she learns that they've rebuilt that Robo Ninja thing from the beginning, which is named Kurohagane. On top of that, you start encountering varieties of mechanical enemies that have armor, which through trial and error, I found that the kick can destroy so that you can dispatch them properly. This part was a little less intuitive than the missile bit from earlier, but I'm glad they go on about having you figure this out early enough, because from this point on, the number of enemies that don't have armor begins to exponentially get smaller. Making it through the lab, you learn that Nakatomi has also been studying Hibana, and it's not really explained why, but it doesn't take much imagination to guess that it's to teach Kurohagane some high-tier ninja tech. You immediately get an answer to that anyway when it uses said ninja tech to track down Hibana as she's escaping the exploding lab. She beats it down again and continues on to challenge Jimushi. Around this point, I found it increasingly frustrating getting through the stages due to a number of facts, from the ever-increasing amounts of death pits. Seriously, by stage 6, this game was starting to make stage 5 and Shinobi look like the kiddie pool, aside from it actually being like literally a big pool, but I digress. In addition, they start spawning these armored enemies that I wasn't sure how to deal with at first. But as I said, you start getting into a flow where you use the kick to break the armor, but I really wish they would have just said that, because there's no indication of how to deal with these as they arrive, so I was left to trial and error these guys. They start mixing them in more often after they first appear, and even though armor breaks add to the combo timer, it really starts to test my muscle memory, and some of these fuckers are airborne too, so it really becomes an actual trial when you're trying to stay airborne without breaking your flow. You only get one kick and one sword attack and one dash at a time, and like the last game, they reset if you can land a hit on an enemy, but whiff a hit or get interrupted and suddenly you're either scrambling to follow up or straight up falling to your death. That's fucking fun. At least the game had the decency to get to the game over screen a lot faster, because I remember falling to my death in Shinobi and having to hang my head for at least a couple seconds before the game over screen popped up. Now it's like, great job dumbass, now let's get you back in there. Whatever. We get past Kurohagane and hitch a ride on some speedboats when Jimushi hacks her comms, which I'm sure Hibana doesn't mind anyway, because at this point her handler was starting to get on my nerves too, getting a little comfortable talking like he can't get that location found out real fast, but I'm digressing. Hibana gets her one-on-one with Jimushi, where she starts to let out some of that angst and resentment she's been stewing up for a while, and after a quick duel, Jimushi basically says the reason he left her behind was because he viewed the Oboro and the government as corrupt. Oh, and by the by, they were part of the Oboro clan apparently. Hibana grew up alongside Hotsuma and Maritsune, it said, but the Oboro had a rule where women can't be the leader, so they sent her to live with a branch family because reasons. So she has a real big chip on her shoulder about that, along with abandonment issues from Jimushi leaving the clan, which she apparently faced some kind of consequence for, as I said before. The more I learn, which up to this point is never stated in any way inside the game, the more I start not feeling bad about the Oboro getting wiped out. They sound like they fucking suck. Back to that point about Hibana being part of the clan, I mean, sure, you can totally look at her design and draw parallels to Hotsuma, as well as how I couldn't help but notice the obvious homage to Joe Musashi, the original Shinobi protagonist with her color scheme and all. I know that I already have my criticisms for Shinobi's writing and establishing of character dynamics, but why am I finding out stuff like this from skimming the wiki while trying to find info on development? Where'd they even get this from? Her appearance in Project Cross Zone 2? I'm so confused as to why none of this is in the game. And where the fuck is Hotsuma during all this? Alright, tangent over, let's get back on point. Jamushi reveals that his real goal this whole time has been to keep Akujiki out of the reach of those outside parties vying for control of it. But just as he's explaining this, Kurohagane comes in, deals a kill shot to Jamushi, grabs his shards and takes off, with Hibana in tow after Jamushi's dying request. But just doing that would be too simple. Now we've got this girl Hisui joining the fray. This is so random, but earlier one of Jamushi's ninja group, who's a little...
Because tonight will be the night that I will fall for you,
mentions that Jamushi took a new pupil to make Hibana jealous. So now, even though Hibana didn't kill Jamushi, and even though there are more important things going on, that pupil decides now is the perfect time for a little bit of revenge. Long story short, she doesn't get it and vows revenge on Hibana. God, get a therapist, girl. Distractions over for now. We follow Kurohagane to, of all places, the Golden Palace from the end of Shinobi. And I can't believe it, but they made it even worse than before. It's 3 levels long, 2.5 I guess, but it is full to spilling over with armored enemies, death pits, environmental hazards, and did I mention death pits? Holy shit! At the end of this, we fight one more giant hellspawn in the basement of the palace who drops the last shard of Akujiki, just in time for Kurohagane to swoop in at the last second and snatch it up like it's a fucking cartoon or something. And the last time we fought him, he was showing himself to be capable of speech, however broken it may have been at the time, but now he's perfectly capable of waffling about how since he doesn't have a soul, he's apparently the perfect choice for wielding Akujiki. Despite that, for some reason, he almost immediately after asks Hibana to become Akujiki's master, only for her to refuse because she wishes to remain in control of her own soul, I guess. Man, who the fuck wrote this dialogue? Kurohagane drags us up to the roof of the palace just so that he can break out of his armor and start aura farming in his final form with a completed Akujiki, and then challenging us to one final fight. In this fight, he's basically a knockoff of Hatsuma, animations and all, but this fight is utter bullshit. I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. He blocks every other hit, he can throw kunai to stun you, he randomly lights up the stage with danger zones that damage you and throw you up in the air for like no recovery. He's covered in a barrier that for some reason requires you to kick it a bunch to break it, but then he starts spamming teleports all over the place to hit you with sword combos, and forget about learning these patterns and slowly damaging him over time, because at some point he will regenerate his health for a second phase where he gets even harder, hits harder, summons shadow clones acting as fodder for a big tate combo to finish Kurohagane off, but this is not enough damage for what you're putting me through, game. You do not understand. It took me an embarrassing amount of hours to beat this last boss fight, so much so that I ended up deleting over 3 hours worth of footage where I was just getting repeatedly curb stomped, and I was not interested in forcing my editor to suffer through all of that. But after long enough, I got it done, I took an Advil, and then I watched the after mission report state that the government agency only cares to retrieve Akujiki and that apparently Hibana's life is of no concern to them. Kinda crazy to say, not gonna lie. Hibana, surrounded by the government agents, hands over the sword in her hand only to reveal that that sword is the wrong sword, deciding to keep Akujiki and going rogue, taking off her mask and walking off into the sunset while the credits roll. For as much as this game frustrated me, it was pretty satisfying to have actually beaten it. I've seen some posts online amongst people who've actually played it where they call this one of the hardest PS2 games out there, and I kind of struggle with that personally. Not because I don't agree with that, but rather because of why it's hard. Once you get past the halfway point in this game, it seems that the game itself is incredibly keen on employing the most frustrating level design possible, on top of implementing hazards designed to slow down all but some of the most fine-tuned motor functions. It's possible, but man, they do not make it easy on you. I also couldn't help but feel as though the game's presentation wasn't hitting the same for me. I don't know how others feel about this, but I'm of the mind that Hibana's animations are just not as smooth or cool as Hotsuma's. It's as if they tried to accentuate this more feminine character with some femme fatale poses, but something just feels stiff. I do like that she has more than one tate animation in the air. That is something she has over Hotsuma in that department, but I only really like the one where she twirls her short swords. There's the few and far in between instances where the challenge is to never drop the tate combo, which leads to combos of 30 plus, and then the animation gets this more cinematic feel, which as a person playing in 2025, this reminds me of Mai's critical art in Street Fighter 6, so that's neat in retrospect, I guess. I'm also kind of torn on a certain part of her costume design. The energy trails coming off of her headband, which is kind of kinda cool, but I look at this and I think of Mega Man X Command Mission, where X had the same thing, and I'm sorry, nothing beats that flowing red scarf that Hotsuma has. Kurohagane knew ball when he tried stealing Hotsuma's drip.
He copied my whole fucking flow! Word for word, bar for bar!
I just can't help but feel this is an area where they weren't trying as hard. I don't really have too many problems with Hibana's style personally, but this reeks of trying to be just as good as what came before and coming up short. And honestly, why the hell is Hibana so obsessed with whether or not it's my day?
Today's just not my day. Today isn't your day. Today just isn't my day. Looks like today was your day. This really isn't my day. Looks like it's not your day either.
I also don't think the music hits the same. It's a lot more electronic than previously, and that's okay at first, but then it doesn't get much more interesting after that. Not even for boss fights, save Kurohagane, because in the 3 times you fight him, each time the theme gets increasingly more full on the instrumentation side, but I still don't find it very memorable. I think the only track I can remember offhand is the song for Stage 2. The HUD of this game also seems so much more sci-fi and sterile compared to what came before. For a while, I was preoccupied with the aesthetical differences to the point that I perceived this game as not having the same smooth frame rate as before, but I eventually sort of acclimated and started appreciating some of the level design. This part is more modern as well, right out of the gate with the stage on the bomber jet, but then we follow up on skyscrapers during the twilight hour, going through the city at night, fighting on top of moving traffic, and later over boats and stuff. Come to think of it, this game low-key has a fetish for this kind of set piece, fighting on things in motion. Imagine aura farming by being perfectly still over the top of moving cars on the highway while taking out a bunch of enemies. Regardless, it seems like the game already knows itself where we'd be coming from, because if you have a save from Shinobi, beating the game unlocks Hotsuma to play through the game with, and oh my god, he's so overpowered in this. For one, he is still wielding Akujiki, so his strength is up there, and his sword goes straight through armor, so I immediately no longer need to use the kick. Thank goodness for that, because sometimes trying to get a flow going with that whole dash kick sword thing was giving me a serious case of stupid fingers. No complaints from me for this. That said, when I went to play as Hotsuma, I saw 2 more blanked out slots, meaning that there are more unlockable characters. So I go and look it up, and you can unlock that girl Hisui by beating the game again on easy mode, which is okay, I figure. But then I see the last character is Joe Musashi himself, straight out of the Genesis games. And I thought that was pretty sick until I saw that his unlock requirement was to beat 88 stages. How many times do you really expect me to want to play this game over? The game is only 13 levels long. I understand it can be fun to play with different styles, and doing the completion thing can lead to unlocking challenge levels, but then I go and look up his gameplay online, and aside from the fact that he gets unlimited kunai, he's basically a reskinned Hotsuma. And for as much as I love Hotsuma, I already have Hotsuma in the game, so guess what? I ain't doing that! I'm glad I finally got this under the belt, but I'm pretty much done with Nightshade. Frustrations be damned, I was glad to say that I finished it, but it didn't iterate on the formula created by its predecessor in a way that I think would translate into continued success. Spoilers, it didn't. Still, it was a challenge I'm glad I took on, and now I'm pumped for Art of Vengeance at the end of the month. But what are your thoughts on Nightshade? If you've played it, let me know how you feel in the comments, and thanks for taking the time out to watch the video. If you liked what you saw, leave a like and maybe subscribe so you can see what comes next. I'd love to see it. In the meantime, you can also follow me on Twitch, where I play a ton of games that may or may not make it to being talked about on this side. I also want to take a moment to thank my patrons. If you want to be someone that supports the works on this channel, be sure to check out the One Sleepy Giant Patreon, where all are welcome in the Sleepy City crew. And that's all the time I've got for today, people. My name is Hector, and I'm One Sleepy Giant. This game kind of stressed me out, so I'm gonna take a nap. Let's pick this up later, okay?
Objection! Hector, aren't you forgetting something?
What are you talking about?
You know Onimusha, Dawn of Dreams? You gotta do that video, right?
Come on,
Don't,
bro.
hey, don't come on, bro, me.
No, I don't want to do that right now.
You said it. You gotta do it.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No!